Siegemaster Vorx has a long and eventful history during his time in the 14th Legion. He's one of the few still living barbarian youths that fought for the Primarch Mortarion in his original Death Guard against the Overlords that tyrannized the planet's human population. When the Death Lord was discovered by the Emperor and given command of his Legionis Astartes, Vorx joined the Legion among the first aspirants from the planet Barbarus. Later, he was promoted to the Fleet Commander position, a title known as Siegemaster among the Death Guard, with the Death Guard actually having a plethora of special titles for their warriors. But in the current timeline, he's more well known to be the warlord of the Lords of Silence, one of the most powerful Vectoriums of the Legion. Though where the story of Vorx truly begins is when he was a child and his first fateful encounter with Mortarion. Vorx was just another human under the tyranny of the Overlords, with his mother and father living in a village surrounded by a miasmic fog, and the sun never really penetrated through the dark skies. It was pretty gloomy, to say the least. But one night, a particularly nightmarish overlord came to their village and began murdering all the residents. They did their best in defending themselves against the Pale King, but how can an ordinary human possibly defend themselves against such a horror? Many people were killed, including his parents, but just before his own death, the Primarch showed up. Though the monstrosity was much larger than Mortarion, the Pale King was far less deadly, and after a brutal fight, Mortarion's scythe had turned the Overlord into a steamy pile of gore. He spoke to the villagers and attempted to inspire them with rhetoric that humans would be free once he'd ended the evil of the Pale Kings on the planet, and then he strode off into the poisonous mist into the night. However, Vorx didn't have much to go back to, and so decided to seek out Mortarion and join his rebellion against the Pale Kings. Somehow he survived the trip through the blasted, toxic wasteland, and upon his discovery of the Death Guard was welcomed. He joined their ranks and was quickly trained to be a warrior, with child soldiers not really being a rare sight, but the Primarch's army was growing ever more significant, and the Primarch even helped in increasing their technology. By the time Vorx was able to fight like a true soldier, they were more than able to be a threat to the Pale Kings. And just like his time later as an Astartes, Vorx's favorite weapon is the scythe. After many battles, Mortarion and his army brought an end to the rule of the Overlords, and it was then that the Emperor came. After the Primarch failed to kill his father, and he became oath-bound to the Master of Mankind, Vorx was of the first to be inducted into the 14th Legion, to which all further recruits would come from, and the Legion was renamed the Death Guard, in honor of the warriors of Barbarus. As an Astartes, Vorx was above average in might and very formidable in battle. During a joint war with some Blood Angels, Vorx fought alongside Captain Camanio and his men. He tried to befriend them, but was astonished at how the Blood Angels legionnaires treated them with contempt. When he was trying to build camaraderie, Captain Camanio insulted the Death Guard. He taunted Vorx, saying that his men were asking who could ever follow that skin and bones wretch, or even call it a Primarch, when referring to Mortarion. Now, Vorx didn't give in to anger or rage, but was perplexed by the insult, and held on to it. At the end of the Great Crusade, when War Master Horus turned against the Emperor and rallied legions to his side, it was without hesitation that Vorx supported his beloved Mortarion. He fought for the Death Lord throughout the war and even completely embraced Nurgle on that fateful trip through the warp on the way to the Siege of Terra, enjoying his new gifts from the god greatly. At the Siege of Terra itself, Vorx came across the Blood Angel Captain Camanio, who'd so casually insulted his Primarch to his face many years before. He remembered how callous and arrogant they'd been to the Death Guard, and yet without rage, he inexorably came at the Blood Angel Captain and tore him to ribbons with his plague-blessed scythe. Though when the traitors were eventually forced to flee after the Emperor slew Horus, Vorx assisted in keeping the Death Guard in good order. Within the Eye of Terror, Siegemaster Vorx would become a key player in the Long War against the hated Imperium. For 10,000 years, he battled against the servants of the Corpse Emperor. Eventually, Siegemaster Vorx would become the lord of one of the most powerful Death Guard warbands, the Lords of Silence, who helped War Master Abaddon in many of his campaigns, as well as the latest one, the 13th Black Crusade. The Lords of Silence Victorium fought in the Battle of Cadia, and after its fall, assisted in the second attempt to take the Forge World of Agrippina near the Cadian Gate. The combined assault of Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Black Legion, and other heretics were under the command of the World Eater's Chaos Lord, Kasalax. Yet in the end, the forces of chaos were once again repulsed. However, the Lords of Silence suffered little to no casualties, and even gained new recruits for the warband, including a few loyalist marines that were forsaking the Imperium and abandoning their chapters. And with the coming of the Cicatrix Maledictum, Vorx and his Lords of Silence would be called back to the Plague Planet. Mortarion was once again leading his legion, and summoned his mightiest commanders to the Plague Planet to organize an assault into real space. Ever loyal and dutiful, Vorx heeded the call and was summoned to a personal meeting with Mortarion himself. The Primarch had always favored him and his Vectorium, though Vorx was kind of perplexed at some of the things that the Death Lord had to tell him, such as Mortarion saying that he no longer cared about Terra, which the Siegemaster immediately analyzed in his private thoughts during the interaction and was pretty perplexed by it. After all, what could the Primarch possibly mean by he didn't care about Terra anymore? Without any elaboration from Mortarion, this statement boggled the Death Guard's mind. However, all in all, he took his orders and obeyed his master to take his warband to meet up with the rest of the Legion in the Ultima Segmentum. The Primarch wanted to focus his forces on the empire of his recently awakened brother, Rabute Gilliman. Before leaving the Plague World with his warband, he had a quick chat with the first captain, Typhus, to which his inner monologue was pretty suggestive that many of the Death Guard don't really care for Typhus. In the interaction, he wasn't antagonistic towards Typhus, but he said in his mind that they all looked at him in a different light because they knew what he did to them, which is actually some nuance that's rarely seen in Chaos factions, and hopefully explored in future chronicling of Siegemaster Vorx. In any case, he left the first captain and then went into the warp to follow the Primarch's orders, but things didn't quite work out as planned. Instead of popping out of the warp in real space where they expected to, they materialized in the galactic southwest in Segmentum Pacificus. Before the Lords of Silence was the Sabatine system, which contained the homeworld to the White Consul's Space Marine chapter. Vorx knew that to remain in command of the Lords of Silence, he had to keep his warriors busy and fed with victory. If he didn't organize quickly, there were always those who coveted his position as the warband leader, and only the strong deserved to lead, so instead of wasting time trying to warp jump back to the rest of the Legion, he instead chose to claim the Space Marine world for the Plague God. Vorx had concluded, and rightly so, that there were elements of his men that were planning his downfall, and the conflict would be ideal for sorting them out and executing any threat to his power, as well as cementing his position as the Lord of Contagion of the Vectorium. And there were other heretic Astartes who were also present and had ambitions for the White Consul's homeworld, a warband from the Wordbearers Legion known as the Weeping Veil, and so the two forces allied to conquer the planet. However, Vorx knew of the treachery behind the Weeping Veil's mask of friendship. The Siegemaster kept his cards close to his chest, leaving some to doubt his leadership and thus expose themselves as his secret enemies. And indeed, it didn't take long for those plotting his downfall to begin making their moves. The majority of the White Consul's chapter had been deployed to defend the Imperium against Abaddon's Black Crusade, so the chapter homeworld was left with only a skeleton crew to protect it. Vorx led his warband personally in a direct confrontation with the Adeptus Astartes, with of course the Weeping Veil's support. They eventually made it to the heart of the planet's defense, and Siegemaster Vorx challenged the White Consul's chapter master to personal combat. And in the brutal fight, Vorx slew the chapter master in the duel, He also took out or suppressed those within the Lords of Silence who'd been working against him, and removed him as Lord of the Victorium. Many doubted the clever ingenuity of the Siegemaster to their own detriment, including the Word-Bearers, thinking that they'd sacrifice the population to the Chaos Gods. But Vorx had already begun the transformation of the population into Poxwalkers, making the Weeping Legion's rituals unsuccessful, and not soon after they realized this, fled the planet. And then Vorx oversaw the planet's transformation into a plague planet. Siegemaster Vorx is an incredibly cool-headed and cunning commander, with an intellect that's far more formidable than one would assume at first glance. He never lets emotion dictate any of his actions and inexorably moves forward in his objectives with patience. He's also one of the most deadly Lords of Contagion in combat in the Legion, making Vorx and the Lords of Silence of the most feared in the Death Guard. Yet more is to come concerning the chronicles of Siegemaster Vorx, so rest assured there will be more to cover in the future.